Book 2. The Two Pillars of the Kagyu Introduction. After the departure of the Master, when Milarepa left his body on the quiet slope of Lachi Snow Mountain, Tibet did not fall silent. Instead, two very different echoes began to rise across the land. One was fierce and wandering, a sound like wind scraping over cliff faces. The voice of Rechungpa, Milarepa's wild-hearted disciple, returning from India too late to see his master one last time. His grief was sharp, restless, turning into a vow to preserve the raw yogic essence of Milarepa's path. He roamed from valley to valley, singing, teaching, struggling, and finally maturing into a lineage holder of unmatched fire. The other echo was calm and structured, like water settling into a broad valley. The voice of Gampopa, the physician monk of Dagpo. Guided by Milarepa's final instructions, he founded monasteries, shaped the Kagyu doctrine, and gathered brilliant students whose traditions would one day spread across the Himalayas like flowing rivers. One embodied the yogi's freedom. The other embodied the monk's clarity. Together, they carried Milarepa's teachings into the future, not as copies of their master, but as two distinct flames rising from the same spark. This book continues where Milarepa's story ended, following the footsteps of these two men who were not only disciples, but founders, innovators, rivals at times, and ultimately the twin pillars of an entire lineage. Milarepa had passed only a few years earlier, around 1123, and the mountains of central Tibet still felt strangely hollow without his voice. Gampopa had wandered for a time after the cremation, traveling eastward through valleys and villages, teaching a few people wherever he paused. His compassion drew students, and by 1127, he settled in the forested region of Dagpo, building a simple hermit's retreat. Slowly, quietly, disciples gathered around him until the clearing became a small but vibrant spiritual community. Word of this spread across the plateau. Word also spread across India. Rechungpa, still training with Indian siddhas, heard whispers carried by merchants and monks. The physician monk Gampopa now teaches Milarepa's lineage. His instructions are clear as moonlit water. Disciples are gathering in a forest valley in Dagpo. These words struck Rechungpa like a hammer. He had left Tibet believing he would return as the master's brilliant emissary, the one who would help shape the future of Milarepa's teachings. To hear that another student, one trained in monastic discipline, had already begun doing so, ignited a fierce mix of hurt, pride, and urgency. He traveled back to Tibet immediately. Rechungpa's arrival. He found Gampopa seated under a pine tree, surrounded by a handful of young monks who listened with quiet, eager attention. Gampopa rose at once and bowed deeply. "Brother," he said, "Milarepa's voice lives in your body. Welcome home." Rechumpa's eyes softened, but only for a moment. "Home is where the Guru lives," he said, "but he is no longer here. So tell me, Gampopa, why do you teach in his place?" The monks fell silent. Gampopa gestured for them to leave, and together the two sat by a stream where the Dagpo forest opened toward a narrow ravine. The water murmured softly, like Milarepa's own songs, while the tension between the disciples grew thick. The debate begins. Rechungpa spoke first. "You learned the Dharma from our master, yes, but you also came with years of monastic training. You are already a physician, a monk, a scholar. You teach from that seat. I teach from the raw seat of ascetic practice. Our paths are not the same." Gampopa nodded calmly. "Our paths are different, but they point to the same sky. The Buddha left 84,000 teachings, because beings need 84,000 dates. Richumpa's voice sharpened. But are your teachings Milarepa's? You speak plainly, logically, like one who builds steps toward wisdom. Our master sang the Dharma like wind over stone. He shattered ego with the fierce compassion of a mountain storm. Where is that fire in you? Gampopa closed his eyes briefly. Rechungpa, I do not imitate our teacher. I only continue what he asked of me. Before he died, he told me, spread the Dharma in a way beings can understand. Some need form, some need freedom. You will know which is which. Rechungpa stiffened. Did he speak to me? No, I was away. I was not there when he died. So now you claim to carry his final instructions. I do not claim anything, Gampopa answered gently. I only follow the vow he placed in my heart. The debate turns inward. Rechungpa suddenly looked away, the edges of his anger dissolving into something more painful. You saw him when he died, he whispered. I did not. I left seeking teachings to offer him, but returned with nothing but regrets. For the first time, Gampopa reached forward and clasped his arm. He knew your heart. He spoke of you often. He said, Rechumpa's path is wild and powerful. Do not tame him. Only support him. You honor him simply by living. Rechumpa's eyes glistened, though he tried to hide it beneath his long, unkempt hair. But pride dies hard. And yet, he said quietly, you sit here with students, building a community. And I have no one. Gampopa smiled softly. Then take some of mine, or teach those who wander through Dagpo. Or go to the mountains and let disciples find you by the fragrance of your meditation. Your way need not look like mine. How the meeting ended. By the time the sun dipped behind the pines, the sharp edges between them had softened. They walked through the forest discussing their practices, their memories of Milarepa, and the different ways they had understood the same instructions. They were not the same. They would never be the same, and that was exactly as Milarepa had intended. When Rechungpa departed the next morning, he left with a calmer heart, but also with a lingering ache. Gampopa had grown into an enlightened being, filled with clarity, patience, and radiance. Rechungpa felt this deeply, and though he honored it, a small ember of envy, or perhaps simply loss, glowed within him. For now, though he bowed respectfully, Gampopa, he said, your way is not mine, but your wisdom is true. I will walk the mountain path and carry our master's psalms in the wind. And I, Gampopa answered, will build the roots that allow them to spread. They parted as brothers, though not without complexity. Two branches of the same tree, reaching in different directions. When Rechungpa left Dagpo, the early morning mist still clung to the pine trees. He departed with no companions, carrying nothing but his travel cloak, a small bag of tampa, and the echo of his conversation with Gampopa. Though the debate had ended gently, a quiet turmoil churned in him. One part of his heart bowed to Gampopa's serene wisdom. Another part recoiled, refusing to accept that someone else had stepped into the role he once imagined for himself. He walked west, toward the harsher, wilder parts of Tibet, places where Milarepa himself had once wandered. Let me find what I lost, he whispered to the wind. Let me find the fire that only the mountains can give. The hermit of Tsari Valley, Rechumpa's first stop was Tsari, a holy forested region where yogis and wandering monks often retreated. The valley was steep, its cliffs streaked with ancient cave dwellings. Snow fell early in Tari, wrapping the land in a silence that pressed against the soul. He stayed in a narrow cave overlooking a milky river. There, he meditated fiercely, using Mahamudra instructions mixed with the secret yogas he'd learned in India. Some days he practiced Tummo until steam rose from his skin. Other days he sat without moving until snow covered him like a burial shroud. During one winter, a hunter found him half frozen and unresponsive. Believing he had died, the hunter prepared to carry him down the mountain, until Rechungpa suddenly opened his eyes and said, "Even death is not a disturbance to one who meditates well." The hunter fled in terror, and for weeks afterward, travelers whispered that a ghost lived in the cave. But Rechungpa did not stay long. He never stayed long. The Snow Lake vision. From Tari, he wandered north and reached a remote lake called Girma Cho, known for visions. He arrived at dusk, exhausted and hungry, his mind gnawing with doubts about whether he was truly worthy to carry Milarepa's lineage. He sat beside the lake and closed his eyes. As moonlight spilled over the water, he felt a presence behind him. Light, warm, unmistakable. When he opened his eyes, he saw a reflection in the lake. Milarepa, seated in meditation, smiling at him. Rechung Doje, the reflection said, not in words, but in the language of the heart. You wander because your path is the sky, not the earth. Your fire is needed in places where gentle instruction cannot reach. Do not measure yourself against Gampopa. Measure yourself only against the truth of your own mind. Tears fell into the water, breaking the reflection into ripples. When the vision faded, Rechungpa knew he had been corrected, encouraged, and forgiven all at once. Encounters with spirits and bandits. Leaving the lake, he traveled through desolate ridges where bandits often hid. One night, a group armed with daggers surrounded him. "What do you carry?" their leader snarled. "Nothing but the Dharma," Rechungpa replied. The bandits laughed until Rechungpa rose into meditation posture and began to sing a yogic song he had learned from an Indian adept. His voice trembled through the valley like thunder. Strange winds picked up. Torches flickered and blew out. The men fell to their knees, terrified. Some fled. One stayed and later became one of Rechungpa's lifelong disciples. But the physical world wasn't his only challenge. Rechungpa also encountered the subtle beings Milarepa had warned him about: mountain spirits, hungry ghosts, wandering demons. Unlike Milarepa, he did not always convert them gently. Sometimes he fought with mantras. Sometimes he subdued them with yogic energy. Sometimes he simply ignored them until their projections dissolved. By the time he reached the southern region of Shung and Lower Nubri, he had become a figure of myth, half yogi, half siddha, unpredictable, war, and deeply magnetic. Reputation and restlessness. While Gampopa's disciples spoke of clarity and structure, stories of Rechungpa spread like lightning. He sleeps on cliffs. He walks barefoot through snow. He argues with demons. He tames bandits with songs. He carries Milarepa's wildness in his bones. And yet Rechungpa did not feel triumphant. He felt unsettled. For although the visions, miracles, and hardships sharpened him, something remained incomplete. He needed to reconcile his pride, his longing for Milarepa, and his complicated feelings toward Gampopa. And he needed to understand his place in the lineage, not as a shadow of Milarepa, but as the carrier of a distinct flame. The mountains told him the same message again and again. Your practice is strong, but your heart is not yet quiet. The second meeting. Years passed, though not many, perhaps 4 or 5. Eventually, Rechungpa heard that Gampopa's community in Dakpo had grown into a respected hermitage. Monks traveled from across Tibet, seeking the clear structures of Dakpo, teachings praised for purity and directness. Rechungpa felt no anger this time, only curiosity and a subtle reverence. In the 5 years after his first meeting with Rechungpa, Gampopa entered a period of blossoming clarity. The raw grief of losing Milarepa had softened, settling into a steady warmth he carried wherever he walked. Dagpo Valley itself seemed to respond. Forests grew denser, the river steadier, and travelers remarked that the air felt unusually clear, as though the land recognized that a great practitioner now lived upon it. The growth of Depto, the first students came quietly, drawn by rumor. A monk who carries the blessing of Milarepa, they whispered. A teacher who knows both meditation and medicine. They found Gampopa unpretentious, mending robes, brewing herbal tea, or fetching water from the river like any other monk. When asked why he lived so simply, he always answered, "If you wish to show people the path, you must walk it without disguise." Soon, more students came. By 1129, 20 monks lived with him. By 1131, nearly 50. By 1133, the monastery at Dagpo had become one of the most respected centers of meditation in southern Tibet. But the heart of this community was not its size. It was the teachings that began to crystallize in Gampopa during these quiet years. The four dharmas become a living practice. The four dharmas of Gampopa. May the dharma enter my mind. May the dharma become the path. May the path dispel confusion. May confusion dawn as wisdom. Were no longer just teachings he had received from Milarepa. In Dagpo, they became a complete, living curriculum. 1. Entering the mind, Gampopa taught his monks to soften their hearts through breath, contemplation of impermanence, and simple mindfulness of kindness. He often said, "If compassion does not rise in your chest, the Dharma has not entered." Monks began each day with slow walking meditation along the riverbank, letting their minds settle before any study. 2. Becoming the path. Gampopa insisted the Dharma must follow them into chores and daily routines, fetching water, chopping wood, mixing medicinal balms, debating philosophical points while repairing roofs. To him, the monastery was not a sanctuary from life, but a training ground for real moment-to-moment awareness. He would say, "If you cannot practice while stirring soup, you cannot practice in meditation." 3. Dispelling confusion. Gampopa taught that ignorance wasn't a dark enemy, but a misunderstanding. He used simple metaphors. A knot that looks tight but unravels with one pull. A shadow that disappears when you turn toward the light. Snow that seems solid but melts to nothing in the hand. Monks described feeling as though their deepest anxieties simply loosened around him. 4. Confusion dawns as wisdom. This final part of the teaching grew more profound each year. Gampopa increasingly emphasized Mahamudra, the great seal of reality. Do not fight your thoughts. See them as ripples on the lake of mind. The lake was always clear before them and remains clear beneath them. Students reported experiencing spontaneous clarity, sudden dissolving of doubt, and moments of effortless meditation. Even travelers who stayed only a night sometimes left with tears in their eyes, saying the valley itself felt like a teacher. The first signs of a future lineage. By 1132, the Dagpo community had taken on a distinct flavor, a mixture of monastic discipline from Gampopa's Kadampa background, the raw yogic intensity inherited from Milarepa. a directness of instruction that felt almost like hearing Milarepa's own voice. Visitors began calling the growing tradition Dakpo Kabyu, the Kagyu of Dakpo. Gampopa, however, never used the name. He simply said, "I only pass on what my guru gave me." But everyone saw that something new was forming, a bridge between monk and yogi, between structure and spontaneity, between philosophical clarity and mountain wild devotion. The shadow of a return. And yet, despite the harmony in Dagpo, Dampopa often felt a presence stirring at the edge of the valley, a memory shaped like a man in patched robes, fiery-eyed, unpredictable, devoted and proud in equal measure. The mountains carried whispers from wandering pilgrims, a yogi singing Milarepa's songs in Nepal, a wild disciple practicing in caves above Helambu, a Tibetan hermit teaching Raffle mantra rituals near Kashmir. Gampopa would smile gently whenever he heard these tales. His affection for Rechungpa had only grown in their years apart. And by late 1133, those whispers had grown into certainty. Rechungpa was coming north, toward Dadpo, toward him. The air above the monastery changed, like a wind rising before a long-awaited storm. The autumn of 1133 came early to Dakpo. The pines darkened, the river thinned, and the sky held a sharpness that made distant mountains appear close enough to touch. Gampopa felt it in meditation first, a faint tremor, like a vibration running through the valley. One afternoon, as he finished teaching, a young monk approached, breathless. "Master, a wandering yogi approaches from the southern pass." Gampopa nodded. He knew who it was before the boy even spoke the name. Rechungpa arrives. Rechungpa entered the monastery yard like a gust of mountain wind, robes patched and dusty, eyes bright with the restless fire of long travel. He carried a small pack full of manuscripts gathered from Nepal and India, and a damaru drum tied to his belt. His long hair was matted with snow, but he walked with the confidence of one who had spent a lifetime in caves and storms. The monks, unused to such wildness, stepped aside as he passed. When he saw Gampopa standing at the gateway, he froze. For a moment the years fell away. No monastery, no students, no roles. Only two disciples of the same master, meeting in the shadow of shared devotion. Rechungpa bowed, deeply, more deeply than he had ever bowed in the past. Gampopa stepped forward and placed a hand on his shoulder. "My brother," he said, "welcome home." The first hours together, well, they walked through the courtyard, the evening sun turning the roofs gold. Some monks watched in awe. This was the legendary wandering disciple of Milarepa. Others observed him with caution. The intensity in his eyes unsettled them. Rechungpa noticed, of course. "You've built quite a kingdom here," he said with a crooked smile. "A community, students, order." Gampopa laughed softly. "A kingdom, no. Only a place for the Dharma to settle." Rechumpa's eyes flicked over the temple, the meditation huts, the disciplined rows of monks. "It's not what our guru lived in." "No," Gampopa said, "but it is what Tibet needs now." There was no hostility in his voice, only a calm certainty. In the abbot's room, after a simple meal, they sat alone in Gampopa's quarters, bare save for a meditation cushion, a kettle, and a small clay statue of Milarepa. Rechungpa's gaze lingered on it. "More peace than I feel." Gampopa poured tea. "Where have you traveled?" The answer came like an avalanche. Stories of Nepal's high passes, fierce ascetics of Helambu, yogis who practiced in cremation grounds, and Indian scholars seeking the essence of tantric texts. Rechungpa spoke of hidden teachings, mantras taught by wandering siddha, and 1,000 solitary meditations in caves where wolves howled outside. When he finished, the room fell silent. "And you?" Rechungpa finally asked. Gampopa gestured outside. "I taught." Rechungpa smirked. "Of course you did. But this time there was no resentment, only curiosity." The debate begins. They moved to a small side hall where an oil lamp flickered. In the old days, Milarepa had urged them to sharpen each other, like stones striking sparks. Tonight, the sparks flew again. Rechungpa struck first. Milarepa taught the path of yogis, raw retreat, solitude, direct experience. "But you've turned it into a monastery. Aren't you afraid the essence will become diluted?" Gampopa answered calmly. "Solitude frees the mind, but the Dharma must be made available to many, not just those who can live in caves." Rechungpa frowned. "The highest teachings belong to those who can receive them." "And how do you know who they are?" Gampopa replied gently. "The one who sweeps the floor may awaken before the one who meditates on a mountaintop." Rechungpa paused. It was a blow he did not expect. On the nature of enlightenment, Rechungpa's voice softened. "The others say you are enlightened now." Gampopa didn't react with pride or denial. "If the mind rests in its natural state," he said, "what is there to call enlightened or unenlightened?" Rechungpa exhaled slowly. "You're not the same man I met 5 years ago." "Neither are you," Gampopa said kindly. "Our paths differ, but our master's blessing shines in both." For the first time, Rechungpa didn't argue. A night of shared silence. They sat together for a long time without speaking. Outside, monks extinguished the lamps one by one. A wind rose, whispering against the wooden beams. Rechungpa finally whispered, "Sometimes I think Milarepa loved you more." Gampopa shook his head. "He loved us according to our natures. You were his fire, I was his water." Rechungpa swallowed hard. "I miss him." "I do too," Gampopa said. Their eyes met, and the wall of competition and pride softened into something truer. Shared grief, shared devotion, shared legacy. What happened next? Before dawn, Rechungpa rose. "I will stay for a short time," he said quietly. "Teach a little, practice a little, then continue my wandering." Gampopa nodded. "Stay as long as you wish. This place is yours as much as mine." And so the two disciples of Milarepa walked together into the early light, their paths momentarily aligned again, like two rivers that meet briefly before flowing onward into different valleys. Rechungpa did not settle easily into the rhythms of Dakpo. The monastery was peaceful, orderly, methodical, three qualities he had never fully embodied. He had lived too long in caves and wild places to feel immediately comfortable among chanting monks and structured routines. Yet for the first few days after their reunion, he remained close to Gampopa, observing everything with sharp, wary eyes. A yogi among monks, Dakpo monks rose before dawn, bathed in the cold river, and began their morning rounds of chanting and meditation. Rechungpa, by contrast, woke like a storm, abruptly, intensely, stretching his limbs as though still on a mountain ledge. He wandered the corridors with his travel-worn damaru hanging from his belt, looking slightly out of place among the neat rows of red-robed monks. Some monks bowed, fascinated. Others whispered that his fiery gaze reminded them of the stories of Milarepa himself. But Rechungpa felt the distance. "They look at me," he muttered to Gampopa one morning, as if I'm a ghost from a wilder world. Gampopa smiled gently. Bao, you are from a wilder world, and that is why they need you. Your fire balances my calm. Rechungpa snorted, half amused, half skeptical. Teaching in the courtyard. When Gampopa invited him to teach a group of advanced practitioners, Rechungpa hesitated. Teaching required stillness, not his strongest quality. But when he finally stood before them in the courtyard, something shifted. He closed his eyes, felt the wind, and began to sing. Not a polished monastic instruction, not a carefully structured discourse. A song, raw and piercing, in the style of his master. Body is the tent of wind, mind is the rider of light. Look inward, friends, and you will find no traveler at all. The monks were stunned. Some trembled, others wept. Even Gampopa bowed his head with deep respect. For a moment, Rechungpa felt the familiar surge, the presence of Milarepa flowing through him like lightning. The tension returns, yet the harmony did not last. Rechungpa began to wander the valley alone, seeking caves and solitary rocks. He avoided communal meals, skipped chanting sessions, and occasionally contradicted Gampopa's teachings in small ways, not out of malice, but instinct. He preferred spontaneity. Gampa preferred structure. He valued secrecy. Gampa valued clarity. He trusted the lonely mountains more than organized communities. One evening, after a teaching, Rechungpa said bluntly, "You are creating a school Milarepa never intended." Gampa met the blow calmly. Milarepa taught each of us differently. He knew you needed the wind. He knew I needed the valley. Rechungpa paced the room. But now people call you the successor, the holder of his lineage. What does that make me? Gampa looked at him with compassion, the kind that sees through pride into the wound beneath. You are the flame he lit to keep the yogic path alive. I am the lamp that lights the monastery hall. Both shine from the same source. Rechungpa stopped pacing. His expression softened, but the conflict did not disappear entirely. Private confessions. Later that night, the two men walked along the river in near darkness. Rechungpa said quietly, "Some days I want to stay here and teach. Some days I want to run back to the mountains and never speak to anyone again." Gampopa nodded. Both impulses are true, and neither diminishes you. Rechungpa stared at the water as it caught the moonlight. Do you think Milarepa would approve of all this? Gampopa's reply was soft but unwavering. He approves whenever we train our minds, and he scolds us whenever we cling. Rechungpa almost smiled. Then he must be scolding me constantly, and loving you constantly, Gampopa said. The departure. After a month in Dakpa, Rechungpa felt the old restlessness tightening in his chest. The monastery, for all its peace, felt like walls closing in. On a fog-swept morning, he approached Gampopa. "I must go," he said plainly. "The mountains call me. There are practices I have not completed. There are teachings still hidden in the pole." Gampopa bowed his head in acceptance. "Your path is the wind's path. May your travels strengthen the lineage, not scatter it." Rechungpa exhaled, relieved and heavy at once. "And you, my brother, don't let the monastery bind your heart." "It will not bind me," Gampopa said. "It will free others." They embraced. Two men shaped by the same master, walking in different directions. Rechungpa turned south towards steep passes and wild valleys. Gampopa watched until his figure dissolved into the mist. And so the wandering yogi left Agpo, leaving behind a spark that would continue to ignite the hearts of monks long after his footprints faded from the valley. After Rechungpa left Agpo for the second time, Gampopa stood alone at the edge of the valley, watching the yobin's figure vanish into the morning mist. When the last trace disappeared, he turned back toward the monastery and felt, more strongly than ever before, the full weight of the responsibilities awaiting him. The next decade would test him in ways meditation never had. 1. The burden of fame. The first challenge was the simplest, yet the most exhausting. Gampopa had become too well known. Word of his teaching spread far beyond Akpo. Pilgrims arrived daily, some sincere, others searching for miracles, fortune-telling, cures, blessings, or political advantage. Many came not to hear the Dharma, but to pull from him something for themselves. At times, the monastery courtyard looked like a marketplace. Gampopa dealt with this in two ways. He thinned the crowd. He began holding only one large teaching a month, instead of many small ones. Visitors were asked to wait, sometimes for weeks. Those who stayed revealed genuine devotion. The rest drifted away. He emphasized simplicity. Instead of dramatic teachings, he offered walking meditation by the river, slow breath practice instructions on compassion, silent sessions. Many pilgrims, disappointed, left quickly, but those who stayed transformed deeply. Gampopa understood. If they sought spectacle, they were not his students. 2. Pressure from local lords. The political tensions in southern Tibet were growing. Local leaders, jealous of each other and eager for spiritual legitimacy, tried to pull Gampopa into their rivalries. Messengers came bearing gifts, silk horses, gold, land promises of protection, and attached to each gift was a request. Bless our army, support our claim, condemn our rival, predict the outcome of our conflict. Gampopa refused all of them. But refusals bred new problems. If you do not support us, you help our enemies. That was the unspoken accusation. Some lords withdrew support. Others threatened to tax or pressure the monastery. Some even spread rumors that Gampopa secretly aided their rivals. How he faced this? He chose transparency. Whenever envoys came, he met them publicly, in the presence of monks and visitors. He would say, "The Dharma does not lean to one side. It is like the sun. It shines on all valleys. I bless peace, not victories." Sometimes this angered the lords, but none could accuse him of secret favoritism. Gampopa endured the tension calmly, convinced that neutrality was a spiritual duty. It kept the teachings pure. 3. Conflict within the monastery. A growing community brings growing friction. After the second meeting with Rechungpa, Dakpo saw an influx of students from two very different backgrounds. Strict Kadampa monks, wild yogins inspired by Milarepa's example. The two groups often clashed. Monks complained yogins were undisciplined. Yogins claimed monks were rigid and spiritually dry. Some wanted more ritual, others rejected ritual altogether. How Gampopa resolved this, he called the entire monastery together. In the main hall he placed a monk's folded robe on one side and a yogin's meditation belt on the other. Then he said, "The robe restrains the body, the belt restrains the mind. We need both. he instituted a balanced daily schedule: monastic discipline in the morning, Mahamudra practice in the afternoon, service and mindful labor throughout the day, personal retreats on a rotating schedule. This created a new hybrid culture, neither monkish nor purely yogic, but uniquely Kagyu. Unity formed slowly, but it held. 4. Gampopa's personal struggle. Despite his calm exterior, Gampopa suffered a subtle, private difficulty: the ache of responsibility. He longed for the open, solitary meditations he had shared with Milarepa. Now every hour of his day was consumed by students, decisions, teaching schedules, and the constant flow of visitors. Sometimes at night, he would slip away to the river, sit under the moon, and meditate alone, whispering to the memory of his teacher, Exter, "I fear I am becoming a wall rather than a path." How he overcame it. One night, after days of managing disputes, he had a dream. He saw Milarepa standing on a snowy ridge, smiling, singing in his soft, piercing voice. The measure of realization is not how far you walk alone, but whether your footsteps open the way for others. Gampopa awoke with tears drying on his cheeks. From that night onward, he accepted his role without hesitation. He stopped wishing for solitude. He understood that guiding thousands was simply another form of meditation, one that required humility rather than escape. 5. The issue of succession. As his community grew, pressure mounted. Who will inherit the lineage? Who will lead when you are gone? Students quietly competed for prominence. Some lobbied for recognition. Others tried to prove their discipline by overzealous austerities. How Gampopa addressed it. He made one clear rule: a leader does not arise from ambition, but from understanding. Instead of appointing a successor, he instructed everyone to practice deeply. The lineage would choose its own heirs by the natural flow of realization. This decision later allowed great students like Dusum Khenpa, First Karmapa, Phakmo Dupa, and others to emerge without political entanglement. 6. Illness and aging. By the late 1130s, Gampopa was in his mid-60s. His health began to show signs of strain. Bouts of exhaustion, headaches caused by long hours of teaching, difficulty sleeping, gradual weakening of his legs. He continued working, but he quietly reduced his own meals to ease his stomach. He trained more senior students to teach in his place when necessary. He simplified the monastery's administrative structure so that he would not be the bottleneck for decisions. And when he grew too tired, he would sit by the river, let the current become his breath, and rest in Mahamudra. 7. How he faced it all. Gampopa dealt with every problem in the same way, with transparency, with calm reason, with compassion for all sides, without favoritism, and always with an eye on the Dharma, not worldly gains. When pressures mounted, students noticed that he never stiffened or raised his voice. Instead, he became softer, his compassion deepened. He understood that the path of a master is not to avoid difficulties, but to transmute them. As Milarepa once transmuted storms and demons into spiritual companions. And so, Gampopa carried the whole valley on his shoulders without bending, without bitterness, and without ever losing the gentle smile that everyone remembered him for. After his second meeting with Gampopa, Rechungpa felt a deeper hunger for understanding. The quiet confidence he saw in Gampopa made him realize that he had mastered techniques, but not himself. So he retraced the hints Milarepa had given him years earlier: small jokes, half-finished stories, and cryptic remarks about yogis who speak with the wind. His first stop was a remote hermitage where he studied Tai Lom, a system of training the subtle channels and the inner winds that carry emotion and thought. The goal was simple but brutal: clear emotional knots by controlling the breath. His teacher, Shiwa Lodro, forced him into long sessions of breath holding while visualizing flames in the belly. At first, he gasped, trembled, and sometimes nearly fainted. But as he persisted, he noticed that old anger and restlessness lost their grip. Next, a wandering yogini named Drolma Ki taught him dream yoga, a method for becoming aware inside dreams. She insisted that if he could recognize dreams as dreams, he would eventually see waking life as equally fluid. For weeks he failed, slipping into ordinary sleep. But one night, a dream dissolved into pure clarity, and he understood he was just beginning. Farther west, Rechungpa encountered a small group of tantric adepts who preserved rare practices. They taught in Fowa, training the practitioner to project consciousness upward at the moment of death. Its purpose was not escape, but fearlessness, the certainty that mind is not bound to the body. The practice often left him nauseous or dizzy, but these were signs the energy pathways were opening. They also taught Chilu, a method of drawing life force from the elements to stabilize health during intense retreat. To earn this teaching, he performed the full night of Chod, a ritual meant to cut through ego by offering one's imagined body to the spirits of old battlefield grounds. At first he shook with fear, hearing wolves, wind, and imagined ghosts, but the longer he stayed, the more he felt fear melt into compassion. Later, a scholar yogi named Setan Dorji trained him in Mahamudra, pointing him directly to the nature of mind. He drilled him through lists of faults and antidotes, helping him see how subtle pride and doubt still ruled him. These sessions often ended with Rechungpa humbled but clearer than before. Over the following years, these practices reshaped him. Salong made his emotions transparent. They rose and faded like clouds without driving him. Dream yoga gave him lightness, showing him that fear and joy were both passing displays. Chod taught the roots of pride and self-importance. Foa and Chilo taught him to face pain and illness without panic. And Mahamudra tied everything together, guiding him to rest in natural awareness instead of chasing experiences. Conflicts still followed him. Teachers who doubted his sincerity, rivals who tried to provoke him, but Rechungpa no longer felt compelled to prove anything. When he healed villagers with Chilu or debated monks in small mountain monasteries, he did so with a calm Milarepa would have recognized. Illness struck him often during travel, but he used these moments as training. By the time he turned east toward Dagpo, he was changed, not only wiser in methods, but gentler in heart, and ready for his path to cross Gampopas again. Rechungpa stood at the edge of the forest clearing, watching Gampopa finish instructing a group of young monks. When the students bowed and left, Gampopa turned with a faint smile. Gampopa, Rechungpa, your footsteps are still as light as they were the day you left. Rechungpa, and you look calmer than ever, almost annoyingly calm. Gampopa, I have had years to sand down my roughness. Rechungpa, I can see that. I've had years to sharpen mine. They sat facing one another, the air thick with unspoken history. Rechungpa, I didn't come for formalities. I came because the world feels noisy and I wanted to hear your mind again. Gampopa, then speak. Noise becomes quiet when examined. Tell me this, Gampopa. How can you teach people who have barely trained? They haven't cut through illusions. They cling to comfort. Comfort can be a starting point. Not every student must be pushed into storms. Milarepa never spared me from storms, and look how strong you became. But you forget, he tailored teachings to each disciple. Rechungpa folded his arms. You're suggesting he trained me harshly because I needed harshness? He trained you according to your fire, and me according to my openness. Rechungpa smirked. So you're saying we were both difficult? I'm saying we were both incomplete. Then explain your four dharmas again. Not as a sermon. Explain them to me. Very well. Let the mind turn toward the dharma. This means recognizing the dissatisfaction beneath ordinary life. Without that, no practice begins. I've known dissatisfaction since childhood. That part is easy. Let the dharma become the path. This means discipline, ethical restraint, training. Without ethics, meditation turns into ego strengthening. Is that a jab at me? A reminder. You master techniques, but you often forgot gentleness. Rechungpa frowned but nodded. Let the path clarify confusion. This is meditation. Seeing through illusions, cutting them cleanly. That part I understand. Let confusion dawn as wisdom. This is when clarity stops being forced and becomes natural. Rechumpa's voice softened. You speak like someone who's lived it. I've lived enough to know I haven't finished. And you? What did you find on your travels? Too much and not enough. Teachers who praised me too quickly. Others who challenged me so harshly I bled for their approval. One chode master forced me to meditate beside corpses. And what did you learn? That courage isn't the same as wisdom. That I can cut through fear but still be trapped by pride. You say it plainly. That itself is progress. I'm not sure. Sometimes I feel like all my experiences scattered me. Scattered pieces become a mosaic when understood. Rechungpa exhaled slowly. I came here because I'm tired of wandering. When I left, I thought you were too soft, too gentle to carry Milarepa's fire. And now I see your gentleness as a weapon. You disarm people without breaking them. Gampopa's eyes warmed. And your fire is a medicine. You burn obstacles I couldn't. Maybe our teacher saw this all along. He did. But we needed years of walking separate roads before we could see it ourselves. Then tell me, after all the teachings, all the students, all the years, what have you learned most? That the mind opens faster when the heart softens first. Rechungpa looked away. That is the lesson I never wanted to hear. Rechungpa, you don't need to change your nature. Your intensity is part of your path, and your calm is part of yours. But both paths need balance. Fire without water destroys. Water without fire stagnates. Rechungpa let out a quiet laugh. So we are each other's missing element, not missing, complementing. A long silence passed, not uncomfortable, simply full. Then let us exchange teachings. Your clarity, my ferocity. One last time. Yes, not as master and disciple, as companions, as brothers. Together, they bowed, not to each other, but to the memory of Milarepa, who had shaped both their paths that were finally, after decades, meeting again in harmony. Rechungpa stirred the fire with a twig, watching sparks rise into the dark. Gampopa, he said, you speak of succession as if the path were ending. Gampopa shook his head. Not ending, ripening. A tree bears fruit when it is time, not because it wishes to be done. Rechungpa smirked at that. You always had a talent for gentle metaphors. I dealt in storms, you dealt in gardens. Gampopa smiled faintly. And our teacher held both inside him. Rechungpa nodded, his expression tightening. Then tell me, who carries your branch of the lineage? Gampopa answered quietly. I have watched Dusum Khenpa for years. The discipline is steady. The compassion is natural. He will guard the teachings. Rechungpa leaned back, surprised at the certainty in Gampopa's voice. After a long silence, Gampopa turned toward him. And you, Rechungpa, you've wandered far more than I. You must have found someone with the same fire Milarepa saw in you. Rechungpa hesitated, then let the words fall out. There is one, a young woman from the borderlands, quick-minded, fearless, sharp-tongued. Gampopa raised an eyebrow. Sounds like a smaller version of you. Rechungpa gave a short laugh. A better version, maybe. She challenges everything I say. I never wanted a successor, but she may force me to become one. Gampopa looked at him with warmth. Then she is the right choice. The teachings that came through you were never meant to sit quietly in a monastery. Rechungpa sighed. I worry she'll burn too brightly. Gampopa answered. Then teach her how to burn without destroying herself. They spoke long after the moon rose high. Rechungpa asked, What do you expect from Dusum Khenpa? Gampopa answered, To build a stable path for those who cannot wander, a place where people can learn ethics, meditation, and preparation before facing the deeper practices. Rechungpa nodded slowly. And from me? He asked, though he already knew. Gampopa replied, To protect the yogic transmissions that only lived because you carried them through storms none of us could survive. Rechungpa felt his chest tighten, not with pride, but with relief. Then perhaps there is room for us both after all, he whispered. Gampopa smiled. There always was. When dawn began pushing pale gold across the mountains, their conversation turned softer. Gampopa Sali said, I hate you. Say you on my way. Do not let me have this child and know what you want. Our teacher's song continues through you and through me, not as branches competing for sunlight, but as two rivers flowing from the same glacier. Rechungpa replied, Then we should each choose our heirs with the same care he chose us. Gampopa nodded. Dusum Khenpa will carry my path. Rechungpa said quietly, And the girl will carry mine if she survives what the practices demand. Gampopa placed his palm over his heart. May they both walk further than we did. Rechungpa added, And may they never need to argue as much as we did. They both laughed like brothers.